Good evening, cricket fans, and welcome to Sock TV and Spot On Hose and Fittings Clubhouse on this amazing Wednesday afternoon. To all our loyal viewers, I think it's Wednesday anyway. No, what day is it, Walshy?
No, it's Monday.
It must be Monday. Anyway, look, it's great to have everyone here on a Monday afternoon. We are hitting edition number 117. So thank you for your unwavering support, and it's great to have you all back. I'm your host, Anthony Telf, and it's an absolute pleasure to share another exciting episode where cricket is more than a game, it's a way of life. So before we dive in tonight, don't forget to like, share and comment and keep the conversation alive and vibrant. The clubhouse isn't just about cricket, it's a space where we celebrate the game, relive the highlights and share stories with teammates, opponents and umpires over a cold beer or a softie. Whether you're a grassroots cricketer or an international star, there's something here for everyone. And the podcast is brought to you by Spot On Hose and Fittings, specialists in hydraulic hose and fittings for the mining, manufacturing, agricultural, industrial and construction industries. So let Jeff and Ben Charlesworth know that Telf and Walshy sent you. And as always, I'm joined tonight by great mate and Aussie legendary broadcaster, Peter Walsh. Walshy, what a week it's been. The BBL final is happening as we speak. The ladies went 12-0 up against the Poms. And last night, today, the Aussies have been training in Sri Lanka. And this time next week, I'll be in Sri Lanka with the Spirit of Cricket touring team. And we'll be absolutely stoked because we'll be playing the Colombo Masters in our first game. Just 3 sleeps to go.
Telf, it's a real thrill as always to join you, my friend, and to have such a notable mainstream star with us. He'll be introduced in just a sec. I'm a bit puzzled by sport at the moment. I'm a bit puzzled by when you go to a sporting event, you like to make a noise. If you're at the cricket, you want to make a noise. If you're at a football game, you want to make a noise. But you're not allowed to make a noise at a golf tournament. And you're certainly not allowed to make a noise when they're playing the best tennis that anyone around the world could play. I just don't know whether I can get a feel for it. I'm going to ask our guest a little later on about whether it makes any difference. But what you've said is you've summed it up superbly. There is so much, and there's never going to be too much is not enough. It's been wonderful and lots to think of. And lucky you with your bags packed, heading off to Sri Lanka. You're going to have a wonderful time, and we're going to be looking after all of the spirit of cricket fans by giving them regular reports.
Exactly. Thanks, Walshy. So let's get edition 117 in the clubhouse away. Don't forget our incredible partners, the IF Project and Spot On Hose and Fittings. Together we can make a difference. But tonight, I'm thrilled to welcome the third Chappell to join us in the clubhouse. Greg, Chappell, Ian and Trevor have already, Ian and Trevor have already been here. But tonight, I think we're saving the best till last. But we'll let you, the listeners, decide. Tonight, our special guest, Greg Chappell, is one of the finest cricketers Australia has ever produced, known for his elegance, composure and tactical brilliance. And as one of the 3 Chappells to play Test cricket for Australia, he carved his name in the annals of cricket history with an outstanding performance and iconic moments. His Test career, 87 matches, over 7,000 runs, a batting average of 53, 24 centuries and a high score of 247 not out, and also an ODI career that saw 74 matches, 2,300 runs with a batting average of 40 and 3 centuries. He made his debut in 1970 against England, scoring a century on debut at the Wacker. The first Australian batsman to score over 7,000 test runs, and he served as captain of 48 tests. Greg Chappell, welcome to the clubhouse.
Thanks, Telf. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great. And so what do you think? Do you think we're saving the best till last, having had Trevor first, then Ian, and now yourself?
No, I don't think so. I think probably chronological order is probably the best way to look at it. And it's nice to see that you've toned your shirt down, Wash, anyway. That's really made it a bit easier on my eyes. That's probably the most conservative shirt that I've ever seen you wear, by the way.
Oh, well, by the way, it's the most conservative shirt I've ever seen anyone wear, and that's you.
Just a plain, simple guy.
Do you know what's amazing about tonight is that you two are reacquainting after spending, I guess, so much time together at the Adelaide Oval and obviously through your commentary days commentating on cricket. But we'll get to that later on, no doubt. Walshy's going to relive some of those moments that you spent time together through your Test cricketing career. But I want to take you back, Greg, to those days where there was yourself, Ian, and Trevor in the backyard in South Australia, in Glenelg. It must have been competitive chaos in the backyard. I don't know how you all survived, to be honest.
Well, some of us nearly didn't survive, but the interesting thing is there's quite an age gap between each of us. So Ian's 5 years older and Trevor's 4 and a bit years younger. So we were only children for periods of our life. Even when I was born, Ian was already at school. So during the week, I was at home with Mum on my own, and same with Trevor. So we were never at the same school at the same time. We never played any cricket together until we were adults. Ian's been my hero since I can remember. Whatever he was doing, I wanted to do. Followed him around like the family dog for the first few years, and got treated like the family dog. I got turned around and sent home pretty often. I mean, with a 5-year age gap, as a 5-year-old with a 10-year-old brother, he wanted to be with his mates of that age. So I reckon. Well, I was about 9 years of age, I reckon, before Ian recognised that I was alive, because he had his own mates. But obviously he ran out of mates about that time, because that was when I got invited to play in the Test matches in the backyard. So that was what I was hoping for. Sadly, we always played. They were always Ashes Test matches. Ian, as the older brother, was Australia, and sadly I had to be England, which was a real conundrum. I didn't want to be beaten by my older brother, but I didn't really have my heart in winning for England. But that was by the by. Dad always insisted that we played properly, played seriously. He wanted us to play with a hard ball so that we'd get to understand what a hard ball was like. He didn't give us any pads and gloves to play with, so I got to feel what a hard ball felt like. But as there was some method in the madness, as Dad said, you don't need pads and gloves. If you use the bat properly, you won't need any pads and gloves. So I slowly worked out how to use the bat properly and stop getting hit on the legs, which was a good thing. But those Test matches in the backyard, I didn't realise it at the time. But when I look back, the lessons that I learned in those Test matches were pretty important. I mean, one thing about Ian, once he invited me to play, I was an equal. He treated me like an equal. The sad part for me was that he was 5 years older and bigger and stronger. And so, he was too good for me in the early days, but I just didn't want to get beaten. I loved the contest. I learnt to hang in there and, keep up the best that I could. And some of those lessons in the backyard were pretty important. So I spent about 5 years getting beaten. And then Ian left home, which was good. Then I became Australia and Trevor became England, and I learned to win. So that was it was a good balance for me. The sad thing for Trevor was he never got to be the older brother. So he had Champ the dog that he could sort of beat in the backyard. But when you mention tough to survive, I had one near miss. Once I'd become Australia and the head groundsman of the practice wicket in the backyard, Trevor and I were playing in the middle of the summer holidays. It was a pretty hot day. And the rules were that you batted for each batsman in the team. When that batsman got out, you had to go inside to the laundry, fill in the scorebook, and then come back as the next batsman. Well, while Trevor was away, I thought the wicket was looking a bit peakish, and it probably needed just a sprinkling of water just to keep it going for the rest of the day. So I got the watering can out and gave it a bit of a sprinkle. Trevor came back, faced one ball, and he said, "You've watered the wicket." And I said, "No, not really. just gave it a bit of a spray just to keep it going. He said, no, that's it. And he took his bat, well, he didn't take the ball, but he took his bat and he was heading home into the house. But sadly, there was a water tank outside the back door, and on the tank stand, Dad had left a tomahawk from some of the work that he'd been doing. And Trevor decided that was a better way to sort the problem out, and he came after me with the tomahawk. So I had to run around the fruit trees in the backyard and sort of duck and weave until I could organise myself to get down the side of the house and get out of the backyard. But what I'd forgotten was that Dad built a gate to keep the dog in at night, because Champ used to go roaming the suburbs at night time, and the gate was about 4.5 feet tall, and luckily there was a crossbar on the back of the gate. I was able to get my foot into the crossbar and get over the gate, and the last sound I heard was the thud of the tomahawk going into the wooden gate as I went over the wall. So my career could easily have finished in the backyard at Four Leg Avenue.
Wow, that's amazing. So obviously, Ian was your hero. Trevor, you weren't Trevor's hero, obviously, if he's chasing you with a tomahawk.
I certainly have my moments.
So you talked about that toughness growing up, and obviously no pads, no gloves, obviously probably no box either. That toughness, did that come from your father, or did it come from Victor Richardson? And what are your memories of Victor Richardson? Obviously, a legend also in Australian cricket, and obviously at the Adelaide Oval.
Yeah, Mum and Dad were pretty tough in their own way, and I mean it was an era where you grew up with tough love, particularly from your father. But Dad was pretty good. He spent a lot of time with us in the backyard throwing balls, and I always considered that he was my main coach. From when Ian was 5 years of age, he went on a Sunday morning around to a family friend's place, Lynn Fuller, who'd been a farmer up in the north of South Australia for many years. Lynn was a keen country cricketer, and he had 2 practice wickets in his backyard. And all the kids from the neighbourhood used to go around there on a Sunday morning, and Lynn would, give some coaching. Sadly, I'd fallen off I was pushed off the side fence by one of the neighbours' kids, and I broke my arm just before I turned 5, so I had to wait for a couple of months before I could start at Lynn's place, and I was pretty annoyed about that. But Lynn retired when I was about 9 or 10, so Ian had gone from 5 years of age till about 14 on a Sunday morning to see Lynn. So he always considered Lynn was probably his main coach, but Dad was my main coach. And Dad had spent hours and hours with us in the backyard. And I can only remember once on a Sunday coming home from Sunday school and racing inside, getting changed to head off down the road to play with a couple of the boys in the neighbourhood. And Dad sort of grabbed me as I was disappearing out the front door. "Where do you think you're going?" And I said, "I'm heading down the road to play with the boys." No. After you've had half an hour's practice, you can go. And I was still there 2 hours later, so I don't really feel like I was coerced into doing it. But Mum was pretty blunt and strong in her own way. Obviously, she'd grown up with her father, Vic Richardson, travelling the world, and as the oldest daughter, she'd taken on a lot of responsibility early in the family because her mum finished up passing away when Mum was a teenager, so she'd been the woman of the house for a long time. So she was a pretty tough girl in her own right. I remember Ian saying to somebody once, somebody accused Ian of being pretty blunt, and he said, "You think I'm blunt?" He said, "You obviously haven't met my mother." But yeah, Vic was a presence in our life, but it wasn't an overwhelming presence. There was... we'd probably only see him maybe 3 or 4 times a year at family functions and so on. It wasn't, there weren't a lot of cars around. So, Dad had a work car, but we weren't sort of taking off every weekend to go and visit grandparents or family or whatever. So I was 4 and a bit when Trevor was born, and so I was sent to stay at Richmond Road, where at Vic's place, my mum was in hospital. And I remember somehow cajoling Vic into coming out, because he had a practice wicket in the backyard as well, and getting him to throw a few to me or bowl to me at one stage when I was staying at their place, but that only happened once. And, you know, I could relate to it, probably not so much then, but later when I retired from cricket, the last thing I felt like doing was throwing practice balls or, you know, coaching someone. And I imagine Vic probably felt the same way. So we knew of his record, you know, not only as a cricketer, but as an all-round sportsman. But it wasn't something that was talked about a great deal in the family. I was probably 16 when I remember the only real conversation about cricket with Vic that I was involved in was at a barbecue at our place. And Vic didn't enjoy small talk, and I don't think he probably enjoyed standing up for long periods of time at that stage. So he disappeared into the house at one point, and next thing I saw Ian disappear into the house, and neither of them came back. So I thought I might be missing something. So I went in, and there was Vic sitting in Dad's chair, probably because he knew it was Dad's chair, and he knew it would annoy him if he came in. But there was Ian sitting on the floor at his feet, asking him questions about this player and that player, and, you know, Test cricket generally. And, you know, Vic talked about the Bodyline series during that afternoon, and that was probably the only lengthy conversation that I was privy to. I wasn't involved very much because Ian was doing all the questioning and Vic was doing the answering. Ian, by that stage, would have been 21, so he was old enough probably to appreciate Vic a little bit more than I'd had up until that point. And then, you know, I was away playing cricket. Then I went to Somerset for a couple of seasons and came back when I just turned 21, and Vic passed away just after I turned 21. So I didn't really get to enjoy the opportunity of being adults together to have those conversations with him. But, you know, I think we were blessed with the athletic, the genetic sort of inheritance that we got down the line through Mum from Vic. Dad was a good sportsman in his own right. Played baseball for South Australia. Was in the state squad at cricket for many years. So he was probably, when I look back on it, I think he was a bit frustrated that he didn't reach the heights that he would have liked to have reached in cricket. So he put that energy into us. Because what was he, probably 19 when the Second World War broke out. So he had a fairly big chunk of his sporting career that was interrupted by the Second World War. Whether it would have made any difference, who knows? But I sort of suspect there was a bit of frustration there, and he put that energy into us.
Yeah.
But he had a grand plan for us from an early age. Ian talks about it a number of times. That, you know, Ian had a conversation with Dad when probably Ian was a late teenager, and Martin's plan was that Ian would bat number 3 for Australia, I'd bat number 4, and Trevor would open. So the plan pretty well worked out.
Wasn't far away from it. Wonderful memories, Greg, and thanks for sharing that with all of our viewers. I'm going to throw to Walshy because he's desperate to come into the conversation.
Thanks, Telf. And Greg, it's really nice to have a chat to you. As Telf did say, we've shared a bit of time in commentary boxes, but most importantly, you've always been very, very available when it comes to talking. And I want to start by saying you're very, very aware as to what brought you into cricket. Your brothers were there and you were playing, and that was all good fun. And you had knowledge from people like Victor Richardson and your father. In this day and age, if you look at what's happening around us now, when do you reckon youngsters get spotted, and when do you think they're ready to play Test cricket? When did you think you were ready to go out and represent Australia? At what age?
Yeah, I didn't really think about it. I grew up dreaming of playing Test cricket for Australia, but so did all my mates. I mean, you know, we all played cricket, and you know, we thought it'd be great to play Test cricket. and I certainly did. But I probably deep down thought it was more of a pipe dream than anything. But again, I had the bloke in the next bedroom who was putting the flagstones down for me. I mean, Ian was 18 when he got picked to play for Australia, so I'm 13, and I'm thinking, wow, that's pretty good. Maybe if he can do it, I can do it. And then, of course, when he turned 21, he was playing Test cricket, and that really piqued my interest. And I thought, wow, well, now I've got something to aim for. And by that stage, I was 16, still at school. But to answer your question, I probably don't think I ever thought I was ready, and you're never ready. It's a matter of selectors recognising that you've got something that might work at that level. And, if you're old enough, or if you're good enough, you're old enough. I mean, Sachin Tendulkar was 16, Gary Sobers was probably 17 when he played Test cricket. They were a pretty gifted pair of cricketers. So I think if you're good enough, you're old enough. I think, sort of looking back again, we had the perfect grounding in cricket, with the inheritance from Vic and from an athletic point of view, but from our father's point of view, his passion, his knowledge, the things, when I think back to the things that he told me, about if you want to be a good player, watch good players. And back in the day, the only way we could watch cricket was to go and watch games live at the Adelaide Oval. So whenever, say, New South Wales was in town, it'd be Richie Beno, Norm O'Neill, Neil Harvey, Alan Davidson. They're the ones that you should be watching. And the same, for each state side, he would say, if you're going to the cricket, these are the blokes you should watch. And I mean, Neil Harvey captured my imagination early on. The other guys were great, and they were my heroes, but he was my real hero from a fairly early age. And, he must have thought he had a stalker at Adelaide Oval, because everywhere he went at Adelaide Oval, I was right behind him. Even if it meant, the closest I could get was leaning on the pickets. I'd have the pickets here, and I'd be watching everything he did on the field. If he came off, I'd be up the stairs at the back of a member stand to see if I could find, learn something from him, even, going to the bathroom, I don't know. But if he went down the back stairs, heading towards the practice nets, I was out the back. And the beauty of the practice nets at the Adelaide Oval at the time, you could be this close at the back, behind, the wire at the back of the nets he was a metre away from me. So I could watch him batting. And even though he was left-handed, he was my idol at that stage. And, I copied everything that he did. And when I played in the backyard, or particularly when I played on my own, throwing the ball against the wall and playing test matches, when Neil Harvey came to bat, I batted left-handed. And he always got runs. He never, the Knicks never carried, or, I was never going to give him out LBW. So, that was terrific, to be that close to our heroes of the day. I mean, I can remember watching Ray Linwell bowl in one of his last test matches at the Adelaide Oval, and going around in the afternoon with one of the mates. We sat in the members stand side on to the start of the day, and in the afternoon I went around to the hill at the northern end of the ground, right behind Ray Linwell. And the first thing I noticed in his first over of his second spell, there were footprints on the grass where he'd bowled his first spell. Obviously, the grass was the first day of the game, a little bit fresh and green, and he'd left footprints in the grass. And I'd never seen that before, sitting on the side from side on. And it was just fascinating to watch him run in to bowl in the second spell, treading in exactly the same footprints as he had done in the morning. I couldn't wait to get home to go around to the baseball ground at North Glenelg there, because the grass was a little bit longer, and measure out my run and run in and then check and see if I had footprints. Ray's footprints would have been no bigger than his boot. He was in the same spot every time. Watching Freddie Truman bowl for England in that same test match, running into bowl on Australia Day, funnily enough, and the 21-gun salute at Torrens Parade Ground. And I reckon it was about the 6th gun salute. He was into about his 3rd ball of the over, and he stopped halfway in, and he pulled that white handkerchief out of his pocket and started waving the surrender flag. It was a great moment. So the Adelaide Oval was a big part of our growing up.
Right. I want to go with communication, if you don't mind, for a start, and that is, forget about mobile phones when you were working your way into an Australian team for the first time. Forget about all the media that you can get access to. How did you find out that you were in that test match in Perth?
I was playing for South Australia at the time, obviously. I reckon we were on the Melbourne Express coming back to Adelaide from Melbourne. So we travelled by train at that stage, and Jeff Noblet was the manager of the South Australian team, and Nobby was the one that came and told me that I'd been selected in the 12 for the first test in Brisbane of that series. I was 12th man in the first test match, which I think was a blessing. I was a little bit disappointed, but funny thing about in the day, the practice wickets were on the ground at the Gabba, and so we trained in the morning the day before the test match was to start. And everyone knew that it was a toss-up between Terry Jenner and myself who would be 12th man in that first test match. And you never found out until 20 to 11 on the day who was 12th man. But after we finished training, I wasn't a big breakfast eater in the day, and so I obviously hadn't had much, if anything, to eat. And so we probably finished around 11:30 to training. And we were having a team lunch on the veranda of the old Queensland Cricketers Club, which was at ground level at the Gabba. And so the table was all set up on the veranda. I was the first to arrive at the lunch table because I wanted some food. Terry Jenner was the next one to arrive, and TJ and I sat opposite each other at the table. And the first thing that was brought to the table was a basket of bread rolls. And I couldn't wait. So I sort of dived into the bread basket to grab myself a bread roll, just at the same time that TJ tried to stab one with a fork. And he just took a big gash out of he took a gash out of the back of my hand. And I said something along the lines of, "Gee, Terry, be careful. I've got to play a test match tomorrow." And at that moment, Bill Laurie sat down Bill was the captain. Bill Laurie sat down alongside me, and he just said, "I wouldn't worry if I were you." So it wasn't any great surprise if, at 20 to 11 the next day when I got the tap on the shoulder from Bill to say that bad luck, you're 12th man. But it actually just gave me a test match to find out what test cricket was about, get used to the atmosphere and get used to the feeling that this was test cricket. So we went to Perth for the second test, and again, it was going to be a toss-up between Terry and I. And this time, Terry was 12th man, and I got selected as the all-rounder. They obviously decided that they didn't need the leg spinner in the side, and I was picked as the all-rounder, bowling at number 3 and batting at number 7. So we were 5 for 107 when I went out to bat, and it was then, as I was walking out to bat, that I realised that I wasn't quite ready for Test cricket. I was in a bit of a fog, I sort of didn't quite know what to expect. But the other good luck was that Ian Redduff was being at the other end.
Okay.
And Redders was one of the great combatants, one of the great competitors in Test cricket, and he prized his wicket like very few people. And John Snow was the premier bowler for England at that stage, and I took 48 minutes to get off the mark. It didn't seem that long to me, but family and friends who watched it on television said it was a very long time. But when I look back on it, I didn't face much bowling in that first 48 minutes, and I certainly didn't face much of John Snow. And sadly, Redders has passed away, and he never really answered the question. I've asked him a few times, did you do that on purpose? And I'm sure he did. He just kept me away from Snowy. He thought that, it was his responsibility to take on the premier bowler and make sure we got through, because, they got around the 300 mark, and it was our job, Redders and I, to get us as close as possible.
Mm.
And we put on 219 for the 6 wicket, most of which Redders, the first 100, he got most of them.
Mm.
The second 100, I probably carried a fair share of my weight, but it was one of the great lessons in batting in Test cricket, just being at the other end, watching Redders and how he went about it, and how, as I say, he put so much of a price on his wicket, and he made me realise that there was a contest going on, and I probably needed to come out of my fog and get involved. And even having made 100 in my first Test innings, I didn't make many runs in the next few Test matches. I got 60 odd in the last Test of the summer in Sydney, which was Ian's first Test as captain. But it probably takes between 5 and 10 Test matches, I reckon, to sort of work out how you fit and whether you fit, and how you go about what you do in Test cricket. But batting for the first time in Test cricket at the WACA was probably another piece of good fortune, to get on one of the best, most consistent batting wickets, bouncing wickets. I mean, if a ball landed there, you knew it was going to come through here. There was never any variation in bounce at the WACA, and you got plenty of bounce to work with if you're a batsman, so you get a full range of shots. A lot of things worked out pretty well for me.
Yeah, okay. A couple of quick ones before I pass you back to Telf. Tell me about your first cap, the Australian cap. Did you get that presented, as is the case now? Can you remember how it all happened? But most importantly, do you know where it is?
At the Adelaide Oval, I know where it is. It's on loan, or permanent loan to the Saka. I got a sweater and a cap just given to me at the Brisbane Cricket Ground. That was how we got it. We didn't get any presentation. It was just, here you go, this is what you need. You had to turn up. You had to provide the rest of the gear yourself. Shirt, trousers, underclothes, socks and boots were all yours, and then they gave you a cap and a sweater. Well done, get on with it. But we got a new cap every series, every tour, every series. You got a new cap up until the latter stages of my career, when they then just, you get one, and if you don't think it's if it's not too good, you after a period of time, if it's worn out, bring it back and you get a new one. But I probably got 5 caps over the journey. Some of them, as I say, one's at the Adelaide Oval. A couple went in charity auctions. I gave a couple away to friends, people who'd been very good to me over the journey. And one that I thought was in my possession didn't show up at the last move that we made it. I had a cricket bag which had a few of my old caps, not just the one Australian cap. I had a South Australian cap, a Queensland cap, and my South Brisbane Cricket Club cap all together. And when this cricket bag finally arrived, the other caps were there, but the Aussie cap was gone. So where it went is anyone's guess.
Okay, all right. I'll just touch on this very quickly. You mentioned earlier on in this discussion that you once went out to bat, you batted left-handed. Now, was that done deliberately beforehand? Because now when you see Slammin' Sam, the new opening batsman for Australia, he improvises, he does all sorts of things. If I'd said to you, Greg, how are you going with your ramp shots? You'd probably say to me, are you speaking my language? Things have changed dramatically. My question, and it comes from a couple of good mates who've said, when you talk to Greg Chappell, ask Greg, is it legal? You can change your stance. When the bowler's running into bowl, the bowler can change hands, etc. Bumrah used to do that as the quick bowler for India. But can you change from being a right-hander to a left-hander when the bowler was coming into bowl?
Well, players are doing it all the time.
That's okay.
Well, I mean, it's okay. There's nothing in the laws of cricket against it, but it seems a little bit unequal that bowlers have to tell the umpire if they're going round the wicket or over the wicket, or if they bowling right hand or left hand, but a batsman can decide when the bowler's halfway in or three-quarters of the way in or almost all the way in and just change his stance. Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of conversations around that. I mean, I think if a batsman changes his stance, then it changes the laws around LBWs. And anyway, that's another discussion for another day. But I don't think anyone was well. Put it this way: I don't think the ramp shot would have ever been invented if helmets hadn't come first.
True.
Yeah. Okay, Telf.
Yeah, very good. Great questions there, Walshy. Greg, as a kid, I did exactly what you did. I always played for Australia, and guess what? I was always one of the Chappells because I had my grey nickel scoop. So it was obviously a Greg Chappell scoop. And I was always captain of Australia as well, but I never obviously got there. But your journey through your international career, obviously you said that, your first captain was Bill Laurie. Your second captain, I believe, was obviously Ian. And then World Series cricket came along and you became captain of Australia, I guess, as part of that period, didn't you? Who had the greatest influence on your captaincy and the style that you brought to the game, and then maybe some of those personalities and how you managed some of those personalities that played under you?
Yeah, look, I think I learned something from all the captains. I haven't had many captains. I only had two at the two at the interstate level and two at the top level. Three really, because Kim Hughes, my last season, I played just as a player, and Kim was captain. But I think Les Favell probably had as big an influence on both Ian and I. I think, Les was a very aggressive captain, played to win the game from the outset, wanted to keep the game moving, which was the way we were brought up to play cricket. So probably go back to our father first and foremost. I mean, he was the one that encouraged us. If you've got a bat in your hand for one reason and one reason alone, and that's to score runs, so get on with it. That either the bowler or the batsman is under pressure out in the middle, and if you're a batsman, you want to get the pressure back down the other end as quickly as possible, and the way you do that is to score some runs. So Les was very much of the same opinion, that the game was there to be taken on, and you played to win from the outset. Ian was certainly that way as a captain. The reason I went to Queensland was to get captaincy experience. Ian was captain of South Australia and captain of Australia, and probably would be until he finished as captain of Australia. And I had ambitions to captain Australia. I'd always been the youngest one in every team that I'd ever played for, so there was always someone else that was captain. Ashley Woodcock was my captain at school because he was that much older. So I never got to captain a team anywhere except in the backyard. And I had no one to boss around. I was the only one in the team. So it wasn't much of a captaincy experience. After we came back from the West Indies in '73, Queensland Cricket approached me. Ron Archer was on the committee, as it was in those days, with Queensland Cricket. He rang me to see if I was interested in coming to Queensland. Quite honestly, I wasn't, but I didn't want to be rude. I knew Ron, and I liked Ron, so I said, "Look, leave it with me. Let me have a think about it." John McLean was the next one to ring me. John rang me the next day, and he said, "I've heard that Queensland Cricket has approached you. If you come to Queensland, I will step down so that you can be captain." Now we had a different story. That was a totally different approach. From then on, I became very interested. So when Ron rang me back, I said, "Look, I've had a conversation with John. If you want to put an offer to me, I'll certainly seriously consider it." And I went there without a contract the first year. I was on match payments. That was all. I said, look, I think for 12 months we should have a look at each other. Because Judy and I had only just been married. Judy was from Sydney originally. We'd only been married sort of just a little bit over 12 months. So it was a big thing. She'd just moved from Sydney to Adelaide. Now I was picking her up and taking her to Queensland. But we sort of had a discussion around it. I said, look, the worst thing that can happen, we don't like it, we'll come back here in 12 months. You know, we haven't really lost much. But it could well be, you know, a great opportunity. And as it turned out, it was just a perfect opportunity, not only from a cricket point of view, but Queensland and Brisbane itself was really starting to take off. Joe Bielke Peterson as Premier, and we had a Lord Mayor, Clem Jones, in Brisbane in the day, and Clem was really turning Brisbane into a modern city. And so the timing was obviously very good. Business opportunities opened up that probably wouldn't have been available in Adelaide. So, and you know, finished up. Our 3 kids were all born in Brisbane. You know, we have such happy memories of our time in Brisbane. We had 2 or 3 stints in the end. The first one was pretty much 20 years straight. And then we had a couple of years back there, and then 10 years back there. So over 50 years, we probably spent 30 odd years in Brisbane. And we have some great friends and some great memories, and not least of all the fact that our 3 kids were born there.
Yeah, wonderful. And some of those, who was the hardest cricketer captain in your stint as Australian captain?
Look, it wasn't very hard to get blokes motivated. I mean, they were playing for Australia, for goodness sake. I mean, they didn't need a lot of motivation. But, you know, when I took over the captaincy from Ian, I was sort of under the impression, you know, having watched from a very close quarters, I was standing at second slip most of the time. He was at first slip. So I heard all the conversations with Rod Marsh and, you know, with myself and others around the place, and bowlers that he was talking to, and realised that, you know, there was no one size fits all. Everyone had a different personality and had to be approached differently. So I was pretty much of the opinion that you had to be a sort of amateur psychologist to take on the job as captain of Australia. But it didn't take me long to realise that wasn't good enough. You had to be fully fledged. And, you know, I sort of learned a hell of a lot because everyone was different. But, you know, we were so lucky. I mean, what a tough decision to make, whether you throw the ball to Dennis Lilly or Jeff Thompson. But they were very different personalities and very different types of bowlers. And what worked for Tomo didn't work for Dennis and so on. But as I say, they didn't need a lot of motivation, but just understanding their quirky sort of nature and their quirky personalities was part of the job, and getting to understand. Well, I mean, I played a lot with Tomo because he came to Queensland just after I went to Queensland. So I'd been his captain in Queensland, so I knew him pretty well. Tomo never let us down through lack of effort. Perhaps lack of preparation on a couple of occasions. You know, his pre-seasons, he wasn't big on running around the oval, which was pretty much a fitness program of the day. Tomo did his fitness on the surfboard, you know, chasing pigs, you know, whatever he was fishing. That's how he got his fitness. So the first spell of the season for Tomo was sometimes a bit of a scattergun. You know, you weren't quite sure until he got his radar sort of lined up. He could be a little bit wild, but once he got the radar set up, he logged in the radar, he was as accurate as anyone. But he had the odd day, particularly in his early spells. And I soon learned that I just had to give him 6 or 7 overs in his first spell just to get his balance and his momentum sort of going. And from the second spell onwards, he was as good as anyone. But I do remember a couple of occasions at the start of a season in Queensland where Tomo's accuracy in the first spell wasn't great, but that I understood that. But I know one particular day, the second spell wasn't much better, and I was moved to run down from first slip to the bowler's end to sort of ask him what the bloody hell's going on. And he said, "Oh, mate," he said, "I've got no rhythm. Can't sort of get myself right." I said, "Mate, sort it out, because, make them play. We've got to get some wickets here." And I turned to run back to the slip, and Tomo said, "Hey," he said, "how many steps do I have in the run-up?" And I said, "Mate, how the bloody hell would I know how many steps you have in your run-up?" And he said, "Well, I can't remember whether last season I was using 14 or 15. And I said, "Well, what are you using?" He said, 15. I said, "Well, try 14. Sure enough, 14 was the answer, and away he went, and his rhythm came straight back. But, I mean, for 2.5 years, until he broke his collarbone, what a bowler. Quickest by a significant amount. I remember when one night Michael Holding was asked who was the quickest, and he said, "Well, we were all quick on our day." And he said, "Then there was Tomo." He was in a class of his own, and I remember going to a police function here in Adelaide, probably in the early 2000s, and there was the head of traffic at this particular function. I said, "You'd probably know, you're a radar man. Explain to me the difference between the radar then and the radar now, because I've seen Sean Tate and Brett Lee clocked at 160. Tomo was clocked at 160, no contest. Those two aren't in the same class as Tomo. Why would it be different?" And he said, "Because back in the day, the 160 would have been at the end of carry. In other words, at the keeper." He said, "Whereas now they're clocking it out of the hand. So if Tomo was 160 at that end, he was 170 at this end." And that was the difference. He was quite something. Not to say that Dennis Lilly wasn't quite something. I mean, if you really wanted a wicket, give the ball to Dennis. He was the one that was most likely to get you that wicket.
You had some great cricketers at your disposal, there's no doubt. And as a kid growing up, I just wish we were back in that time again, because you had Marsh and Lilly and Tomo and the Chappells and Dougie Walters, and the list goes on. Look, I'm going to throw to Walshy, but one last question to you before we let you go. The Chappell Foundation, and I've had a little bit to do with Trevor on it as well. Maybe just share a little bit about what that looks like and what that means to the Chappells.
Yeah, we've always been involved, all of us, in one way or another, with charities for most of our adult life. I know we here in Adelaide, before I went to Brisbane, but when I was up in Brisbane, I was involved with the Leukemia Foundation and the Children's Hospital, and a couple of other smaller charities up there. And then I was on the LBW charity, LBW Trust charity, for about 10 years as a patron, and Darshak Mehta, who became a very good friend, was chairman of that LBW Trust throughout that period. And when Darshak stepped down as chairman of LBW Trust, he had a bit of a break for 12 months, and he said to me, "Right, now we've got to do something in the Chappell name." And I said, "Oh, no, I don't think so. I think I'm quite happy doing the stuff that I'm doing." And anyway, anyone who knows Darshak knows he's not an easy man to say no to, and he kept at me. And in the end, I relented, because mainly because it's easier to say yes than no to Darshak in the end. And he had an idea of a few charities, but the LBW Trust is an overseas, raises money for kids in cricket playing countries, or teenagers in cricket playing countries, to get tertiary education. I said, firstly, it's got to be in Australia, and secondly, it's got to be for younger people. And so Judy and I were living in Melbourne at that stage, and I used to walk through Fitzroy Gardens every morning, and there were quite a few people, and a lot of young people, sleeping rough in Fitzroy Gardens. And it came to me then straight away that youth homelessness was what the Chappell Foundation would be about. And so we raised money and awareness for youth homelessness. I mean, there are over 40,000 young people in Australia who haven't got a roof over their heads or haven't got a place to call home. Not all of them sleep rough, but they might be couch surfing at a friend's place, or just finding somewhere to sleep. And for young people, young women particularly, to think that sleeping in the streets is safer than going home just does my head in. For a country like Australia to have over 110,000 people without a place to call home is just unacceptable. And so we support 7 charities. We're a ghost charity in the sense that we don't have an office, we don't have a staff. It's Darshak. We've got a board, board of directors, all volunteers. We operate on the smell of an oil rag. Every dollar we raise goes to the 7 charities that we support, and they all do front of line stuff in different. Each of them are slightly different. The charity is based because Darshak lives in Sydney, so that's where it resides largely, and therefore, probably 4 of the charities in Sydney, 1 in northern New South Wales, 1 in Canberra, and 1 in Brisbane. So we do a main dinner each year, annual dinner, coming up to our 8th annual dinner, which the great Dennis Lilly will be the special guest.
Wow.
We were lucky we had Warney early on. Jimmy Barnes has been probably the only non-cricketing guest that we've had. We've had Ricky Ponting and Adam Gilchrist, Pat Cummins. So we've been very lucky with the support that we've had from the cricket fraternity over the years. We have about 500 people at the annual dinner. We probably raise over 400 grand. So that's our biggest fundraiser. We have a couple of golf days and a few other sportsman sleep out and a few other functions each year. So we've raised in we're coming up to 8 years. We've raised around $5 million over that time, and that's all gone to these 7 charities to support youth homelessness. And you sometimes wonder, and we all do it. You get sort of towards the end of the year and wonder whether it's all worthwhile. And you go to one of our annual dinners and you listen to a couple of these kids speak and tell their story and where they've come from, and you realise that we do some good work. And I said to Darshak when we started, if we can put one life back together, it'll be all worthwhile.
Yeah.
And luckily we support hundreds of kids a year through these charities. The charities do the real hard work. I mean, that coalface stuff is must be heart-wrenching at times. We get a glimpse of it at the annual dinner, but these guys work with it on a daily basis. And as I say, it would be wonderful if we could get to the stage where youth homelessness, any homelessness, was a thing of the past. And I'm optimistic enough to think that at some point we'll find a solution. Not just
Wonderful.
everybody in that space will find the solution, and no one will be homeless in Australia.
And hats off to all of those charities that you are supporting and those people that are out at the coalface. I'm going to throw to you, Walshy. Believe it or not, we've been going 1 hour. I said half an hour, Greg, so I really appreciate your time. But we might just let Walshy ask you one last question. We might get you back again because I've got about 25 other questions I'd love to ask and cover, but it's been an absolute pleasure.
There's no such thing as one last question with Walshy. Come
on. He's under strict instruction tonight, Greg.
No, this is the easy one. And it's not really, because you've been brutally honest with us, is what we expect from you, Greg. Please tell me and our listeners and our viewers, when do you know in your own mind that it's time to retire from the top level? What are the signs? Can you work through those sorts of periods of time when you might have not found form? But when do you know that my time now is to spend more time with sons and wife and do all that, do all the other things you can do, but it's time to give away cricket?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think Ian was 29 when he first retired from Test cricket. He came back a little bit later for World Series cricket, but I said to him, mate, you're mad. I mean, you got years of good cricket in front of you. And he said, no, mate. He said, you'll know. No one will have to tell you. You'll know when it's right. And I did. I was at the Adelaide Oval playing a Test match against Pakistan, and I ran myself out. I hit one straight to mid-off and took off, and I was run out by 5 yards. I don't even think it was a direct hit, so it wasn't a good decision. And as I walked off, I thought, I'm done. It's I had never had any problems compartmentalising, no matter what was happening in my life around cricket. Once I walked on the cricket field, or once I walked inside the cricket ground, everything else was forgotten between sort of 9 o'clock and 7 o'clock that day, and then I deal with the other stuff once the cricket was finished. But all of a sudden, we had 3 children by that stage. And Judy was, she had 3 kids under 6. She'd been a single mother for that 6 years. I'd been away for pretty much most of the time. I think in the first 11 years of our marriage, Rod Marsh and I were sitting somewhere, probably on a couple of stools somewhere at one stage. And I think Rod had been married for just over 11 years and I'd been married for just over 10 years. And we worked out that we had been effectively away for over half that time. So Rod and I had slept in the same room together more often than he and I had slept with our wives. So that was a little bit of a rude awakening. And once Jonathan was born, our youngest, in 1980, so I retired in 84. The strain of having 3 children, and we were in Brisbane, and Judy didn't have any family support. We had some very good friends, but it wasn't family. And it was obvious it was getting harder and harder for her to cope with 3 young children on her own. Because of the era we played in, I worked all through. We all had jobs outside of cricket. In Queensland, I was in business with partners, and they'd been very generous, letting me go off for over half the year to play cricket. And I just realised that it was probably time to move on and get on with the rest of my life. And so I didn't tell anyone. That was the 3rd test in Adelaide. We got to Sydney on the 5th test, and again, I hadn't told anyone. And Phil Ridings was the chairman of selectors. Phil was in Sydney for that last test match. And on the morning of the 5th test match, I went up to Phil and I said, mate, this is it. This will be my last test match. And so that was 10:30 in the morning. The story broke at tea time. And I can't say exactly what Dennis Lilly said, but he came up to me at tea time. He said, oh, bugger. He said, I was going to announce my retirement tomorrow. So it finished up that the 2 of us retired. As it turned out, it was the last test match that Rod played as well. He went on and played the one-dayers after that, but he didn't play another test match. So it was we'd come into the game together and we went out together. And it was a fitting way to finish, because we'd been the 3 Musketeers for all that time, 14 years. As I say, Rod played his first test match in Brisbane. I was in the next test match in Perth, and Dennis played the Adelaide test match. So we all started in that series. Dennis started with 5 wickets in the innings, in his first test match. Rod Marsh took a little bit longer to get started. He was iron gloves in his first test match. And I remember when he took the catch off Dennis to break the wicket-keeping record, we all sort of rushed in to congratulate him, and Doug Walters was in the throng. And he said, that's pretty good, he said, but if you'd taken all the catches that you were given in the first test match, you'd have broken this record weeks ago. So, Doug had a good way of just bringing us all down to earth. But no, it was a wonderful thing, and I didn't need anyone to tell me. I knew my time was up. And to be honest, I've never looked back. I walked off the ground that last day in Sydney. I had a couple of Shield games to play at the end of that season. But I've never thought I might have gone a season too early, or it was perfect. It was a lot easier then because we weren't professional cricketers. I was earning more money off the cricket field than I was making on the cricket field. And when I finished playing cricket, I just went back to work. I had a career. Cricket had been a pastime.
Yep.
And to be honest, I would swap the pay packet with the modern players, but I wouldn't swap the era. And I think part of it was having a job, being connected to the real world, and cricket was an escape. And I was lucky that I was allowed to escape for 14 years. And, Judy gave me probably longer than I deserved. And, I know she struggled in the last few years of my career, just me being away and her having to manage the three youngsters on her own. And I was a slow learner. It took me a couple of years. But, I did say to her, a year or so before, I'm not ready to give it away. And you won't enjoy me being home if I'm not happy. If I don't, if I think I should be somewhere else. But by the time I gave it away, I was very happy to be home because I didn't ever think about wanting to be somewhere else.
Last question, very quickly, I promise. What's your golf handicap?
Playing off 8.
Now, what's your best score off the stick? Have you been better than your handicap?
Yes.
What's your best score?
My lowest score, I've had 3 69s. So I've broken 73 times. And I've broken my age 8 times.
I don't know what to say after that.
I would like to be able to do it again, but the last couple of years I've slowly slipped out. I got down to 1 at my lowest handicap, but the last few years, I was on 4 for a long time, but the last couple of years I've slipped out to 7.5, I think is my current GA.
Yeah, that sounds impressive. I have no idea what you're talking about, but that was a very good answer to that question, Greg, and a good way of me saying a pleasure for me to have a talk to someone that, and I don't care what anyone says about this, you were always my favourite player, even though you moved all over Australia, but then you sat in the commentary box and it was an absolute delight to listen to you in the boringest of shirts that you're wearing tonight. And thank you for that, and I'll throw you back to Telf.
Thank you, Walshy. It's always been a pleasure to know you and to work with you as well. You were passionate about the work that you did, whether it was cricket or any other sport that you're involved with, and it comes across the radio waves. And I think, just quickly, when I was growing up, there was no TV, so you had to listen to cricket. And I was amazed over the radio waves. Every ground had a personality of its own. Now, that was a lot to do with the commentators, the word pictures that they were painting of the ground and the cricket. And obviously I had cricket books and there were photographs and so on, but I was never disappointed. I arrived at a new cricket ground and it felt like it sounded when I was a kid listening to those cricket matches. And I think you're a commentator, a broadcaster. Very similarly, you bring the feeling, the energy of that ground and that game to us across the radio waves. So well done to you as well.
Thank you, Greg. That means a lot.
Very, very well said, Greg, because I'm sitting here and exactly what you said, Greg. I'm sitting here with my idol growing up was Greg Chappell, and the person that I listened to on radio was Peter Walsh. And here I am together with two of the icons of the sport, and I've got goosebumps all over me right now while I sit here and say thank you to both of you for making tonight such a memorable night. And look, Greg, I will catch up with you soon. I'll come down and we'll have a green tea together down at that coffee shop that we caught up with earlier. I think it was last year, and more than happy to come and say hello again. Watch, the passion that you spoke about, Greg, that Walshy has. Watch this. He's going to talk about one of our sponsors now, and I've never seen anyone deliver it so well.
Well, from manufacturing to delivery, wherever you are in Australia, there's only one name you need to know. Spot On Hose and Fittings, based in Wollongong, now with new offices in Newcastle. Spot On is your go-to team for hydraulic, hoses, fittings, adapters, valves and connectors, with delivery available Australia-wide. And here is the best part. They've got on-site testing facilities, so you're getting the highest quality every time. For the mining, manufacturing, agricultural, industrial or construction industries, it's a beauty. Spot On is the team to see. Tell Jeff and Ben Charlesworth, Telf and Walshy sent you. Get it spot on every time. The Chappell leans forward, flicks the ball through mid-wicket. That's another boundary. Greg Chappell, you are a star.
Good on you.
Thanks very much, Walshy, and thank you to you, Greg Chappell, for joining us tonight in the Spot on Hose and Fittings Clubhouse. If you've loved tonight, please like, share and spread the word to all your cricket mates. Let's keep the spirit of cricket alive and thriving. And don't forget, Spot on Hose and Fittings is your trusted partner. Next week, we're coming live from Sri Lanka. I don't know where, I don't know who with, I don't know what day, and I don't know what time, but keep an eye out on our socials and we'll let you know. But look, once again, thanks, Greg Chappell. Thanks, Walshy, for a great evening.